You're answering questions. So, we are very, very lucky today. We have a great crew for a great film, Nitram. So, we have the producer here, Nick Bastias. We have the screenwriter, Shaun Grant. We have Nitram himself, Caleb Landry Jones. And we have the wonderful director, Justin KURZEL. Well, I will start by asking you guys, how was it to deal with such a famous true crime? You've dealt with true crime before, with the Kelly Gang, with Snowtown, with Macbeth. It's a true crime also, I guess. And how was it, and was it difficult?
It was extremely difficult. I live in Tasmania now. I have for the last 4 years. It is the most beautiful place in the world. It's why we moved there, to bring up our children. And I met my wife, Essie, who plays Helen in the film, the year that the Port Arthur shootings happened in 1996. So I'm extremely aware, and when Shaun sent me the script, I took a very, very, very deep breath. But I saw something in the script, and in the way he was trying to tell it, and what he was trying to say, that I found incredibly moving and compelling, and quite shocking in regards to the step-by-step dismantling of this character, but also this kind of moment in the film where it sort of crystallises, for me, what the film is about, when this man walks into a gun store at probably their most dangerous and is able to buy an absurd amount of weapons without a license. There was something about this scene, for the first time I really felt kind of the importance of what gun reform is, and it was something that I walked into very very gently, and we still are. It's a very, very deep wound in Tasmania and also Australia, we feel it every day as we sort of walk with this film.
Shaun, please.
Yeah. I remember, like most Australians, where I was when the news first came. So, the story's been in our DNA for 25 years, and then I think Justin and I did our first film together, and we enjoyed the process. And I remember he was asking me if there was any other things I'd been thinking about, and I mentioned that I was interested in looking at this event, but I didn't know how at the moment. So it took me, 10 years, I guess, of thinking, and then it really didn't I didn't begin writing until 2018, and there were certain things that occurred at that time. In July, I was living in Los Angeles, which I think is probably, if I wasn't, this film would never have happened. There's a gun violence issue in that country that is very different to what we experience in Australia. So in July, a man ran into my local supermarket in Los Angeles and started shooting. My wife was going to go shopping, and a sliding doors moment, she didn't go. She had to go to work, and I was very thankful for that. And then not long after, in late October and early November, there were 2 mass shootings, one in Pittsburgh and one in Thousand Oaks, which is just around LA. So it was, I just kept thinking, and every time there's one of these shootings, Port Arthur is raised by the news broadcasters in America or the late night hosts, and it's used as this shining example of what can be done. And I remember, when we changed the gun laws in my country, we did it in a matter of 12 days as it states, and I took it as one of the proudest moments of my life as an Australian. You can, win all the sporting contests in the world, but what we did there was so amazing. So I just wanted to sort of shine a light on it, and I started writing it, and I wrote it really, really fast. I never told Justin I was writing it. And then one day I texted him and said, check your inbox, and that's when he took his breath. So yeah, you know, I was exceptionally, I did as much research as I could, and I used as much sensitivity as I possibly could, but I just felt it was a really important story to tell.
What about you, Nick?
As the boys have both touched on, it's a super sensitive issue in Australia still, and in many ways I think that's a good thing. The fact that Australians still find an event 25 years in the past to be so raw. It's not an everyday occurrence like it's become in other parts of the world. But when we first started speaking about the film, the key thing that came from Shaun to Justin was absolute restraint needed to be shown in the creative process, and also, you know, keeping in mind that many people in Australia still who are feeling the impacts of the actual events, be they families of victims or be they people in the local community down in Tasmania. So it was a guiding principle throughout. And it was a really tricky film to make as a result of that, because whilst we knew what we were intending to do, we had a script and we had ourselves talking to it. But it was really tricky sourcing some of the normal sources of funding in Australia, because it is such a sensitive issue, and a lot of people felt that a film shouldn't be made about this subject. In some way it was taboo, which was a real challenge, but it also in many ways steeled our resolve to get the thing made. Yeah.
What about you, Caleb? Have you heard about the story before? And what was your reaction when you read the script? I Googled the real story, and you look uncanny. Your resemblance to the character is uncanny. How did you react to that?
Well, as an American, I'm quite desensitized to a mass shooting, I suppose, because it feels like it's on the news every few weeks or so, or more often. Before I read the script, I didn't know anything except for that Australia had gone through this reform. I was worried that the film would concentrate on the shooting, and was kind of scared to even read it just because of that. And I did read it because my agent loves Justin's work so much and was really pushing me to trust me, Caleb, read this script and read it right now. And I read it, and I found it to be the opposite from what I had imagined that it might be. And then I met Shaun and Justin in Los Angeles maybe a day or two later, and I saw in them a sensitivity, an intelligence, an awareness, and that these men had big hearts as well, and that I could trust them to do something as difficult as this.
This is Matic Majcem from RTV Slovenia. I would just like to elaborate on the question a bit further. Justin and Shaun, I imagine that dealing with grief that still exists is one of the most difficult challenges in filmmaking, and I would just like to ask what were some of the ways you approached the subject. Were you in contact with the survivors and the relatives of the victims? And Caleb, while you were preparing for the role, also what were some of the biggest challenges? Did you needed to have this question in mind, how to approach your character from the point of, you know, that you're basically touching on a very sensitive subject? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean it's an ongoing process that we're still going through. It's very difficult to. We never wanted to impose ourselves on, on the community that suffered this, horrific tragedy. At the same time, we've wanted to be available and transparent. So it's really an ongoing process. I mean, I met Essie in 1996. I've been going back and forth to Tasmania now for 25 years, and now live there. So I'm deeply, deeply aware of how difficult this is, and so it's been a process, and it still is. And Each day we kind of moved forward with the film. I think we just have kept on questioning, where are we with it? You know, what are we trying to tell with the film? How are we trying to tell it? So I've never done anything more difficult than this film, even though it's probably been the fastest film I've ever shot, and in a strange way, the simplest. It's also been the most difficult because of that.
As I said, it took me many, many years to actually put pen to paper. I was very, very reluctant because of the grief that you speak of and the hardships that those involved have gone through. But I guess, you know, the idea that hopefully some good can come out of it, I had to trust that if I did the story justice, that there had to be outside of, you know, I don't think of this as just an Australian story. It was very universal. As I said, I was living in a foreign country, and, you know, even the process of writing it, I remember a mass shooting occurring in New Zealand. I remember a mass shooting occurring in Canada, and it just kind of steeled my resolve to go, we need to look at this. Why are these same people continually doing it? Because every time there was one occurred, these perpetrators had such common traits. You know, whether it's, you know, they struggled academically, they were isolated, often there was an absence or a loss of a male role model, and I just kept seeing it, and I was wondering, you know, how and why. And I think, you know, it's very, sometimes it's easier to look away, but I was a big believer in that, you know, evil ignored is evil repeated. So I think sometimes we need to look at our past and try to find a way to make sure that it doesn't happen in the future.
I think what also has been kind of really that we're starting to discover is, you know, there's a whole generation of Australian, like when Port Arthur shootings happened, it was seismic. Everyone knew in Australia where they were at that time that they heard. It was, and it has, the shock of it and the pain of it and the nightmare of it was absolutely, you know, something that has kind of carried through our psyche as Australians. But there's generations of young Australians now that, you know, I talk to that don't know, and that, you know, we're born after the shootings and have a very different relationship with it. So it's interesting how these, you know, these very, very dark chapters, especially in our history, are kind of, you know, over time, you know, we need to find a way of discussing them. We need to find a way of looking at them. I think to understand too, you know, what we have and what we've lost, but also how we sort of move forward.
Hi, Helen Barlow from Australia, covering for The Australian, based in Paris actually. I've spoken to Caleb a few times in the past for his other starring roles. Hi, in Venice for the Safdie brothers, where you were shooting up, and then with Brandon Cronenberg here, where you were also
I don't think I ever shot up in the movie.
You didn't?
No.
Well, you were a user though. You were shooting up your girlfriend.
Yeah, I was playing a user.
Yeah, I realise that.
Big difference. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I realise. I meant your character, of course. No, I mean your character. And your character did a similar thing in Brandon Cronenberg's film, where you also had the lead. These have been your 3 leading roles, and I believe this one is a really great fit for you as well. Why is it that you think you're approached for these kinds of roles, or do you seek them out, these edgy, almost disturbed men that you play? And Justin, what has been the reaction here from your point of view to the film? Have you got any interesting anecdotes about what feedback you've had?
Caleb, do you want?
Oh, and you've got a great accent, great Australian accent.
Oh, thanks.
Which is incredibly hard to do. So, yeah.
And to answer your question from before, my job is to simply absorb and become. And I was very lucky that, and thankful to Justin for surrounding me with so much material to understand Australia and to understand the Australian male, to, you know, that went beyond things that I could have done myself. But as to the characters I play, I'm really just looking to work with great people, great artists that I am influenced by, that do something in me that I can trust and that I believe in. And I've just been very blessed that people like Justin have reached out to me and believed in me in such a way.
So why do you think they're
Oh, I don't know.
analyze it?
Yeah, I don't try to.
I mean, I say to Justin that I'm really excited. We've got to write like a comedy or a romantic lead, because he is the sweetest.
Room without a view.
He is the biggest heart. He is funny. He's the opposite of these things, which is what makes him a great actor. But
Thanks.
We've been really, firstly, to be here, to even get here, you know, on a plane, to leave and get permission to leave the country, and because of obviously the lockdowns there and the situation with COVID, was extremely hard. So we are all feel incredibly blessed to be here from all the way from Australia, and we're hoping to be able to go back. That's right. Hoping to return, otherwise it'll be a long summer in Europe. But I think, you know, what's been interesting is the film is the film plays slightly differently to people that don't know about the Port Arthur shootings. I think Shaun and I were so aware of an Australian audience with it, so I do think we probably subconsciously directed and wrote and placed this film knowing that there would be a shadow over the story, knowing what was the end. But here it's been, you know, quite interesting in terms of the diversity of reactions with those that don't know what the ending is. But we're really, you know, we've been really really heartened and you know.
Like what? Like what reaction?
Sorry?
What kind of reaction?
Well, there's the shock of as the character progresses through the story, if you don't know actually that it is sort of influenced by the real events, there is a shock that happens, as opposed to an Australian watching it is forensically looking at every detail of that character and of those scenes leading up to the ending of the film. And then people from different countries are watching it. You know, when the guns came out on set for the first time, the crew, myself, the actors, everyone just kind of, you know, there was a tension, and it's because I don't see them. I don't see guns. You know, it was the first time I was seeing this sort of weaponry, which to me was horrifying. But then, you know, I talked to Caleb, you know, an American who, you know, is surrounded by a gun culture, and it's a very different conversation. You know, there are over 270 mass shootings in America just this year. So there is a kind of everyday occurrences happening. When you speak to people about gun reform and gun control in America, you can feel this sense of hopelessness about it. And you know, we're still really fortunate in Australia in that it is rare to see, you know, to be around guns. So it was a very unusual thing on set when they did come out. Having said that, you know, these reforms that so amazingly happened in 12 days, they are being softened, you know, and there are more guns in Australia since, you know, 1996. So, you know, it's interesting in terms of looking back into our history and these events. You know, there are things that we still need to keep on discussing.
What's amazing in the film is that Martin Bryant, the real perpetrator, you show him as someone very disturbed, but never as a monster. Was it a conscious choice for you to try to understand how he became that way? That's for the both of you, Caleb, and for Shaun too, and for Justin, of course.
Yeah, look, I mean, as I said, I considered this for a decade essentially to write, and I looked at this issue and this event from many different ways. I'd, started an idea where it was from multiple points of view, and then it was from the police point of view, and it was different things, but it really all led to the scene that Justin referred to earlier about I wanted to try to, because there's so many of these events, wanted to get a better understanding of who it is that's carrying them out, so that hopefully we can protect ourselves and the community from them. And it really led to that gun shop scene. It was I'm going to put you in the shoes of an individual who is obviously has several issues, and you're going to spend time with him. And you had to spend time with him. You had to get to know him. And then you are going to walk into a gun shop and know full well as he goes in that he should not receive these weapons, and then to be handed them over so easily. So that was really at the heart of the film. So in order to do that, you had to spend time with them, So, and I needed to show it. And I mean, there was a quote that's always stuck with me, and it was referring to the Nazis in World War II, and it was the scary thing is not that they were inhuman, but it was that they were human. And I carried that with this character. So that was kind of at the heart of why, I think it's really important. Obviously I've got no problem forgetting the man, but I do have a problem forgetting the event, and that's why I wanted to tell that story. So, it was a really fine balance, and very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, you're, as Shaun said, you're step by step. I think, for me it was about trying to recognise, that street, trying to recognise that mother, trying to recognise that father, that person that walks past on the street that you kind of then walk across the other end of the road, the bullying at school and then being bullied, all the little things that you could sort of watch and start to recognise, I guess, in domesticity, in this sort of in this life, and then start to see how that dismantles was what I was getting from Shaun's script, and that was really hard. We got to the end, and it was interesting. There was a scene right at the end of the film, of the perpetrator sitting at a table at the cottage, and we filmed it, but I didn't know where to put the camera. And this is after the last cafe scene, Broad Arrow cafe scene. I didn't know where to put the camera. I didn't know how to direct Caleb. Caleb didn't really know how to be, and we realised that past that point that he takes the gun out, we couldn't have a relationship with this character. So it felt that's where our sort of film ends with the journey. It was so much about the moments and the beats before.
Caleb, how did you create the character? I mean, did you do research? Did you try to know things about the real perpetrator? And where did you find the humanity of the guy?
I did as much research as I could on Google and whatnot, but Justin provided me with more than ample amount of material that I had not ever heard of, didn't know anything about, that provided kind of almost a psychology in a way, and then at some point it was up to me to carry that further and to inhabit it and to make it my own, and I was given that, and I'm not really sure how to intellectualize it and to tell you how exactly. It's a mixture of a lot of things and quite a bit of time, and yeah.
Let me put it differently. Was it a painful part to play, or could you leave the character out of the door after each day?
No, to do this, the only way was to keep it going the whole time. And so it was very lonely. At times it was very difficult, very painful. But this was necessary to be worn down more and more and more.
I know you've been working with many directors. In which way Justin is different? Considering that you've got the lead also.
I don't think I've ever, I've never had this kind of experience, and it's been the greatest experience for me as an actor working on a film, just because of the way Justin works, just because of the way Shaun writes, just because of the way Nick works. I mean, the people that I was surrounded by was an incredible group of people, and the crew was phenomenal, and we were in a bubble, and we were all together, and we were discussing it all the time, and when we weren't, somehow it was, we were still on it. And it was quite beautiful in that way. But Justin provided me a space and an objective that I don't know how to...
Well, it's really the hardest thing for Caleb's a Texan coming to Australia, and it's 1996 in Australia. So Caleb had to very, very quickly kind of understand that world. And so the only way you can kind of do it is to immerse yourself in it. You have to sort of go out to the, get into the water. You have to kind of watch Australian television from the 90s. You have to kind of, listen to Australian music. You have to sort of culturally try to kind of land in a place where you start to sort of feel it rather than, just doing the Australian accent. So that's an incredible challenge. And he's just the most immersive actor I've worked with. He's, one of the most hardworking. He doesn't have a switch on, switch off button. And that, I think there are a lot of actors that sort of say they like doing that, but to actually do it, is incredibly tiring. It's incredibly lonely. It's very isolating, and and I'm in deep admiration for his sacrifice and dedication to the roles that he plays. I mean, Caleb lives them as an artist. There is no stop button at night. He's always thinking. He's always talking about it. He's always living the kind of experiences through the day. So it's, he's an artist.
Is the fact that you're a musician and that he's a musician helped in any way? For the body language, for
It
example?
helps with rhythm.
Well, it was amazing, because there was, for some reason, and there was pianos everywhere around this set. Because we made this film in a bubble. It was 50, 60 people all living at the, in Geelong in this kind of conference centre. And we didn't have contact with the outside world. So it was just our little unit. So it was like this sort of strange camp. And there was pianos everywhere. And Caleb is the most extraordinary musician. So we had this, despite this incredibly challenging subject matter, it was quite extraordinary to sort of hear this sort of beauty that was being sort of, played around the set from Caleb, I guess, just meditating and needing to play music. And, I think it did have an effect on the film. There are certain sort of scenes and elements, especially around Helen's house, who is, a character that brings culture and brings kind of music and paintings to this character's life. It was really interesting how, the actual process of making it and who Caleb was and his musical background, how those things start to kind of inform the film a little bit.
While filming and writing, did you take in consideration people who didn't know anything about the Port Arthur massacre, which was my case, for example? I was kind of surprised when it happened. Did you think about that?
Well, I think Justin mentioned earlier, to be perfectly honest, at the forefront of our mind was our fellow Australians that knew it very clearly. So in the writing process, that my main focus was just making sure we got that right, and catered to that. So it's been really interesting being here. You know, journalists have sat down with us and they've gone up like you and know nothing, and I start interviewing them and I start asking, wow, what was that like, that experience? Because for me, as I said, I will never forget where I was when it happened. So I'm really interested, and we create a dialogue, and then they remind me that they're supposed to be interviewing me, and we continue on. But I can't imagine what that's like to be able to, you know, to watch it, because, you know, essentially it's a family drama, you know, for a lot of it. So that moment when the guns come out, I can only imagine your breath sort of is taken away. So it was an interesting experience, but it's that with everything that I write and that we make, that you know, the audience bring with it so much. So when journalists ask me questions, what do you want people to feel or come out of? I'm like, well, it's so different for every individual, and I really just put it out there, and what you take away from it is totally up to you.
I think also, you know, what evolved and what became extremely present while making the film is what Judy Davis brought to the role, which I so wish Judy was here and Essie was here. It's quite emotional, actually, not having them here. But Judy brought this perspective of a mother and of a parent that evolved so much that it really became a very kind of an important point of view in the film. And you know, even though it was always there in Shaun's work, I think there was just an incredible insight that Judy brought that, as I said, brought a new perspective to the material.
You know, I heard a lot of people mentioning Gus Van Sant's Elephant about the movie, but I think also we need to talk about Kevin. Would you agree on that? Even if your movie is quite original.
I can't really comment on those, you know, films. I saw Elephant here, and you know, and I remember it having an enormous impact with me. Shaun and I deliberately didn't watch any films. We deliberately didn't read any articles about other shootings. We were very, very focused and forensic about this particular event, and that's how the film's made, and I guess it's how we watch it. Yeah.
That's why you avoided showing the shooting. I mean, the scene where he shot the couple in a house is very, very impressive because you don't see anything. You just hear.
Well, I think there was just a restraint that came from the script that I deeply respected and admired in the way Shaun had written particular scenes of violence in the film, and he wrote it like that you are from the perspective of the car. It's something that, you know, happens from a distance, and you can hear and feel the landscape and the normality of the day around you. And that sort of restraint was actually something I was cinematically really, really interested in, and that I, you know, probably in some of my past work, you know, hadn't sort of investigated as much.
You worked on the sound a lot. There is a big job on the sound, on the soundtrack, and.
Yeah, well, what was amazing was how much we were recording on set. You know, this is the thing about Australia is you're surrounded by bird life there constantly, and you suddenly, when you go to another country, go, wow, it's really quiet here. And then you come to Australia, and our birds and our wildlife is so loud, and it's got such character, and it's so present. And sound recorders in Australia are always saying it's the hardest country to record sound because of it. But I love it. I kind of always lean into it, and it's interesting now. I mean, on True History of the Kelly Gang, my previous film, we used a lot of bird sounds and environment, and you know, and in this it was the same. You know, it was amazing at moments where certain scenes would happen and a bird would tweet, or there'd be a possum in the attic, or you know, it was the roar of the ocean would, you know, come up in one moment in the scene. That all seemed to sort of speak to what we were filming in front of us.
And we won't spoil the story, but there is an incredible scene with a car accident. Can you tell us a little about this scene? Because we don't see it
just
coming.
spoiled the story.
We don't say who is in the car.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm just joking. Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, how did you work on that scene? Because we don't see it coming at all, and it's one of the most violent scenes of the movie, and the most surprising, let's say.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have much time to film it. So we only had one camera, and we had to do it very quickly. And you know, there was a you'll see it. You'll see it. I don't want to spoil the
amazing stunt.
Incredible.
They were amazing.
Well, that's actually one thing to say, is that it is a real crash, and there are two incredibly wonderful, brave, skilled stunt people in that car, and that was pretty amazing to see him and be around.
The result is incredible, really.
Yeah, it is.
I'm wondering how close to the truth this is. Where did you deviate from the truth, and how much was it? Like the car crash, for instance, the relationship with Helen, and the inheritance and all that. How much could you say that? How much was true and how much was not?
Do you want to speak to that, Shaun?
Yeah, I mean, it's that thing that, you know, truth stranger than fiction. You as a writer, you delve into it, and those elements, the character that Helen was, she was an heiress of Tattslotto, you know, that was all factual. So, it's you know, I mean, I'm a big believer, and I've done a number of true stories over the years that absolutely stick to the facts as much as you possibly can, but also it's a narrative. It's not a documentary. I mean, even documentaries, you know, change the truth. But all those things that you just mentioned are factually accurate. The characters, his things. There were certain characters removed from the story because that was a decision I made very early on. That it's because of the sensitivity of the subject and the fact I think anyone involved with these events probably doesn't want it to relive it again. If it was a character that I could tell the story without, then I just morally made the decision to remove them from it.
And that's for all of you. What do you expect the audience gets out with? I mean, it's a story about gun control. Is it a way to say to people, please, please, please don't buy guns, or what?
I think it was all about that scene, that feeling I got when I read it, the feeling I got when we were filming it. And Shaun mentioning it before, when I was there reading that screenplay and he walked into that gun store and just the absolute horrific absurdity of being able to buy those guns without a license, to me sort of said everything, because I truly felt what the film was about in that moment. And I don't think we were wanting to make this sort of overtly political film in terms of looking at gun reform or gun control through a perspective of a lawyer or what. It really was about interrogating this story through a family and through this character, but also really understanding in this moment where you have travelled with this person at their most dangerous, when you're really starting to fear the choices that character is making. They walk into a gun store and they buy guns like they're buying fishing rods. Mm-hmm. And there was something in that moment, the feeling in the script when I read it, where it spoke to me, as film and writing and paintings and anything should, it spoke to me in the heart of what the issue was and what we were making.
Nick?
Well, it's about having that conversation. It's a conversation that's been absent, certainly in Australia. So often when people do monstrous things, they're parked in a prison as monsters because of what they've done. And it's, in the moment, the absolutely appropriate response. But quite often then when they're considered monsters, they're not like us. And so they're considered as other. And so there's a lack of discussion then about how they become monsters. And I think if there's more, we're filmmakers. We're not psychologists, psychiatrists, but I think that conversation is, you can't have too much of that conversation. So I hope that comes from this film.
Shaun?
I mean, I think I said earlier, I hate saying what I want people to take away from it, so I probably won't say too much. But what has been interesting this week is that people take away different things. So it may be the gun issue, but others, look at it as a parenting story and what it's like to be a parent, parenting someone who is clearly unwell and has their own issues. Other people cling on to, it looks at depression, So I think it's totally up to the others. It's also just wonderful, whether you love or hate the film, that we're talking about film and we're seeing films after the past sort of 18 months. So I'm excited, whatever people's reactions are.
Caleb, will you finish on that?
I think there's a lot of people on this planet that are in hell and invisible and need to be seen and treated like we'd like to be treated.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you, gentlemen. Congratulations.